Hello and welcome to the only TV show that chews over the week's news from a Nottinghamshire perspective. I'm Frances Finn, and joining me on the Notts TV debate this week are Councillor Adele Williams,
Hello,
who is the City Councillor for Sherwood. Dr Irfan Malik is a GP, also based in Sherwood. Simon Gray is an executive business coach and he lives in Bunny. And Jess Barnett is a director of the Nottingham Bid and owner of the Treat Kitchen in Nottingham. So let's start with a question about drink and a move in Scotland which has been backed by the Supreme Court. It's upheld Scotland's desire to have a minimum price on a unit of alcohol. This minimum price had been challenged by bodies that argued it was a restriction on trade. Well, 5 years later, the Supreme Court says, yes, Scotland, you can go ahead. So that means a unit of alcohol will now cost you at least 50 pence. Now, for the sort of wine I tend to buy, this isn't going to make much of a difference, I'll be honest. But you can buy great big bottles of cider, cheap cider, with units of alcohol in there for £4.50. That price will now be bumped up to a whopping £11 under these new rules. So I'm just wondering whether you think this will curb excessive drinking or not. Well, can I start with you, Adele? I don't know whether you've got a massive cider habit, but is this going to curb your habits at all? If you were in Scotland, of course. This is not in England,
absolutely.
This is just in Scotland.
Yeah. I don't have it's one thing I wouldn't drink, actually, cider.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's a good thing. What I would hope to see is more resources going into the treatment of people with alcohol and other substance problems. Actually, I mean, it's lots of reasons that people drink to excess, not just the price, and it's much more complicated than that. But what I would like to see is more resources for supporting people at all stages of where they're developing issues with alcohol, so that it's preventative, but also in terms of treatment.
Is this fair, though? It's one of those punitive things, once again, where the responsible person is penalised for a few that just can't be sensible.
Well, I think if it brings more resources into the, if there's a way of doing it that would bring more resources into the government, so that we're able to address these issues. I mean, in Nottinghamshire, we have the Woodlands unit, the substance and alcohol unit over based at Highbury Hospital, is currently at risk of closure, and it's really concerning if there aren't the resources to address those problems in the community. So that's the key issue for me.
So effectively you could argue this is a tax on alcohol, yet more tax to bring people spending down on it. Through your surgery, are you noticing that drink is becoming an increasing issue?
Yes, it's always been a big problem, but definitely increasing. So it can lead to physical problems, psychological problems, and social difficulties as well. So I think this new ruling is an excellent idea if it can reduce the consumption of alcohol.
This is my question, is it going to work? Because if you really want your drink, you're just going to spend more money, aren't you?
I think it will, with some of the youngsters and teenagers who don't have access to that much funds that other people have, and I think overall it will reduce, and I think it's something that could be rolled out across the UK as well. But personally, I don't drink, so.
So a 4-pack of beer, just 4 cans now.
A pound it was in Scotland apparently, but it's going to be a lot higher.
Well, it will be. Let's think. Say there's 2 units in a can. That's going to be a minimum of £4, isn't it? So, I sometimes keep my eyes peeled for a deal and maybe stock up. Those deals wouldn't be forthcoming if I lived in Scotland, because there'll always be that minimum price. And is it fair? Is it fair on just ordinary people who want to occasionally treat themselves?
Well, I think alcohol is a problem, isn't it? It's a problem in Scotland. It's a problem nationwide. And I think raising the price is going to make people think twice. It could push things underground. The illegal drugs market. The price is astronomical because of it's illegal. So there could be an illegal trade starts to develop as a result, which is perhaps something they haven't considered.
I think the things you have to be concerned about is those with a very serious problem are probably going to turn to things like spice, that's a lot cheaper than alcohol when it's sort of dealt on the streets, or things that contain alcohol but aren't necessarily a palatable drink. I mean, that is what you could see, really, worst case scenario.
So the people that are already addicted,
those
this
that
isn't
have
going to
gone
break their
past the point of no
addictions or
return,
habits.
really, without supportive help, could be pushed to something much worse than a cheap bottle of cider.
And this is all about the drinking at home, isn't it? Or the drinking when when you mentioned young people getting that bottle from the off licence and sitting about enjoying yourself. It's not drinking in bars because the price is already above 50 pence a unit, isn't it? I mean, is this the root of all our alcohol evils? The pre-drinking, the pre-loading culture? Drinking at home.
We've had that culture in the UK, haven't we, for a long, long time. When I was coming up as a student, it was all about drinking. I agree with Adele. You've got to change education. You've got to put money back into curing the problem at source. Putting the price on beer is not necessarily going to do it.
But do you not think this? Perhaps some would argue. Some would say that we do not need a bigger nanny state. We do not need to have our decisions made for us in every area of our life. If somebody wants to kill themselves slowly with alcohol, then isn't that their choice?
In one way it is, but I've known a number of people who've died at a very young age because of alcohol abuse, and it's just left horrific consequences for their families and their children. And in the same way that smoking is harmful as well, and taxes are imposed on cigarettes as well. But I think it's an excellent move to reduce alcohol consumption. And also the culture has changed as well. Pubs are closing down. There's a lot more drinking at home because it's cheaper for people to buy, stock up and drink at home instead of going out.
Yes, so would you all welcome this then if English politicians were to go down a similar line? Because I think now the Supreme Court has upheld the Scottish MP vote or SNP vote, whatever. It could now trickle down, couldn't it? South of the border. Interesting. All right. All right. Let's move on and talk about an event or an issue that rears its head very often here in Nottinghamshire, and that is when a group of travellers pitches up illegally on a bit of land. The latest to grab the headlines was on Thackeray's Lane wreck in Gedling, and the travellers there left behind quite an almighty mess. The surface of the ground itself was turned into a bit of a quagmire, and they left things behind like, for instance, an abandoned HGV and even human excrement. Now the council says it's going to cost about 25 grand or more to clear up this site. Now, of course, not every traveller camp leaves behind mess, but this one did. What's the solution? What would you do? Time and time again, these camps arrive and they are then moved on after an expensive battle and a clean-up operation. What's the solution? What would you say? Simon, any ideas? What would you do?
That's a good question. I think there's two issues here. There's a location issue and then there's a being tidy at that location issue. So the travellers have got to go somewhere. And if there isn't a designated place for them to go, then they're going to go wherever they can go. And I think maybe this is an isolated incident. Not all travellers are going to wreck the site. I would like to see maybe more permanent sites where travellers can travel from one site to another because there are other travellers, they know other travellers are going to follow them on. They're going to be more respectful about how they leave the site.
How about in Bunny? How about those
that's
fields
a good
around
idea.
Bunny? No, I'm making a serious point here because we all say, oh yeah, what a good idea, let's have some permanent traveller sites because that's what they want.
Yeah.
But not in my backyard.
Yeah, and it's
Where
true.
are they going to go?
That's a very good question, and I don't have the answer to it. But you're absolutely right to hit on that point that nobody wants that in their backyard.
Would you?
I don't know whether I want it in my backyard, but I think something's got to be done, hasn't it? It seems like a vicious cycle because you've got communities not necessarily being very welcoming to the travellers. You know, as soon as anyone rocks up, it's all in the media, it's all in the local newspapers. And then,
there's hostility, isn't there, before anyone's even done anything?
And so what's the, why would they want to leave it in a nice condition, really, other to prove a point that they're not like that? But that doesn't seem to be happening. So I don't know the solution. I wish I did, but I think perhaps it needs like a task force looking into it and sort of maybe a bit more communication with the travellers to say, look, why are you leaving it like this? Is it because there's no facilities? Is it because there's no, number you can call to dispose of your waste?
So let's say there was a permanent site then, and it had refuse collection, it had amenities that you'd want, would that be a good solution that therefore neighbouring residents wouldn't need to worry? What would the worry be?
I think that regarding the Traveller Society, they just stay a few weeks in different places and then move on. So having a permanent site where they live all the time might not work, but they have different communities.
Well, it has worked in Newark. There's a big site there that's been established for many, many years.
Okay.
And actually it's more about community and being in family groups and having the possibility or freedom to travel should they wish. I think it's more of a kind of cultural identity necessarily than having to travel for some.
Yeah, well, I think it's a social responsibility to respect the traveller community, and they do suffer from hate crimes as well, as you were saying as well. But on the other flip side, they have a responsibility to keep their environment clean and hygienic.
Some would argue that travellers don't have a right, actually, to exist because they don't pay council tax and so on, Adele. What would you say?
Well, if you say that a group of people doesn't have a right to be
to live in the way they
right,
choose.
It's enshrined in our human rights that we have the right to live in the way that we choose. And I think it's really unfortunate that I believe there's no longer a statutory duty for local authorities to provide travellers' sites. There are travellers' sites across our area, but clearly there aren't enough. And,
so you'd welcome having more?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right to say that at the bottom of that problem is that there isn't enough.
Okay, we'll have a short break.
Okay.
Hello, welcome back to the Notts TV debate with me, Frances Finn, and 4 Nottinghamshire panellists. We have Councillor Adele Williams, Dr Irfan Malik, Simon Gray and Jess Barnett. So how would you feel about having an appointment with your GP via your smartphone? This is a trial that has launched in London. 3.5 million patients there are being offered the chance to have an app in their phone. They would submit their symptoms and then within 2 hours potentially have access to a GP via their smartphone. Now this could be, it's argued, a solution to the heavy workload that is on GPs, the number of patients that GPs are expected to see, and so on, the amount of time you have to wait to see your GP. But I'm just wondering whether or not this is a good move when it comes to the quality of healthcare the NHS can offer and the ideal scenario. Now, we have a GP here. So, Irfan, what do you think about this? Would you be happy? Are you reaching for your smartphone right now thinking, yes, give me this app, this is how I want to treat my patients?
I think there are pros and cons. A lot of things have come online now and with apps, and I think for a way of getting advice from a medical person or a doctor, it might be another way to get quicker advice. But I think a lot of our work may involve examinations and listening to chairs, looking into ears, throats. So there are limitations on how much that service can offer.
Could I not just in FaceTime and like hold the phone up, put my tongue out, show you my rash?
We could take a history and we could look at a rash as well via the app, but sometimes you need to do more and actually hands-on and touch and examine patients as well. So there are limitations, but there are a number of companies providing this service, and there are medical legal risks to this as well if the doctor or the medical person advising misses something. And you haven't quite put yourself into a position of making the diagnosis correctly, you do open yourself out to a minefield of medical legal risks.
Just to explain a little bit more about how this works in London, patients are given the option to sign in to the scheme. So they would be off their original GP's books and then be signed onto the books of this virtual scheme. If they don't like how it's going, they can go back onto their original doctor's books. Now, this has been criticised by the Royal College of GPs, this idea. Professor Helen Stokes-Lampard, who chairs it, says, "We are really worried that schemes like this are creating a twin-track approach to general practice, that patients are being cherry-picked, which could actually increase the pressures on traditional GPs based in the community. Older patients and those living with more complex needs want continuity of care and the security of their local practice where their GPs know them." Is that something you'd agree with?
Absolutely, yeah.
But then those patients don't need to sign up, do they?
No, but I think we have to look at it in a wider context, that nationally there's a huge crisis in the NHS and with GPs as well, in recruitment and retention, and there simply aren't enough GPs there, and that's why it's taking longer to book routine appointments with practices. So I think we need to look at the causes of that and try and help provide a better service for GPs.
So for you, this is a sticking plaster, to use an appropriate metaphor medically there, over something that needs a deeper, holistic kind of treatment.
Yes, I would prefer that.
Any thoughts? Would you be happy? Would you actually welcome a smartphone access to your GP?
Well, I think it's been around in the private healthcare sector for a while now, and I have private healthcare for the family. I've got an option to do that on the phone, but I've never used it because I'd actually prefer to go and see the doctor, because I think it's, they need to be hands-on. I would feel slightly nervous that something had been missed. And remember, not everyone's got access to a smartphone. Some of the elderly population may not have the app and may not want to use it.
They would have the choice not to sign up in this way.
Yeah, absolutely. I think from talking to my GP, one of the main problems as to why you can't get an appointment, I don't know whether this is still the case, is that people don't turn up for their appointments. So if the app helped that might be a good thing.
I think I've got 2 small children who are quite often ill, as little children are, and I think I like the reassurance really of taking them to see a GP. I'm not sure, perhaps for myself I would use the app, but for my children I'd want to take them in to see them. But I think, as I understand it, GP surgeries get a set budget per patient regardless of their needs, and so you'd probably have someone like me who's not ill that often using the app, but you'd probably get someone who with a long-term health condition still wanting to use the GP. So that budget is stretched and stretched and stretched. And I think that only adds to the crisis that GPs are in.
Adele, what are your thoughts on it?
Well, I think at the bottom of this, you're absolutely right, is the fundamental issues with the NHS, and it being under-resourced, and I hope that in next week's budget we see some good news for the NHS. That's certainly what I would be pushing for. If in terms of the sort of face-to-face versus the, I don't think, we obviously do need to explore ways for people to access healthcare that are efficient and easy for people to use, but fundamentally, I think we need to have easy access to a GP appointment. And to resource that appropriately so that can happen. That's what's really at the bottom of this, is people feeling that they can't access their GP because of the massive pressure on the NHS. But also I wonder as well, when people say, I'm too busy to get to the GP, are people in employment situations that make that difficult? So if you're on a 0-hours contract, or if your employer is perhaps not the most progressive employer, and people are having difficulties in getting out to work to get to the GP as well, that's something that we need to look at.
Yes, although if you're self-employed, of course, then if you take time out to go to the doctor, well, you might just put it off till tomorrow, and then the next day, and then the next day. And so a smartphone access might be appealing. It might encourage people to seek out medical help. But on the other side of that coin, though, there are many instances where, well, recently I was told I rang up the GP to get a re-referral for my daughter to the eye hospital. She'd been temporarily discharged until we wanted to pick it up again. All the doctor needed to do was just, press a button on the keyboard really and re-refer her. But no, I couldn't do that on the phone. I had to go in and I had to make an appointment and I had to talk to the doctor and I had to wait weeks for that appointment. I was in there for about 20 seconds. What was the need for that? These things surely, with a bit of organisation, sorted out.
I couldn't comment on that individual case, but in our practice we are looking at different ways. So we take advice calls in the morning, all of the doctors there. So we try and manage on the phone as well if we can, and looking at other ways to try and reduce the appointment load. Also internet bookings as well, so we do make it easier for patients to book. But we have like 6 doctors who most of them are part-time, 9,000 patients, so there's a huge pressure as well. But I think the culture has changed with all things. It's a 24/7, banking, buying things, and I think maybe younger patients or people want that 24/7 kind of access to the NHS as well.
Okay, well, we'll just stay with health for a moment, because there has been quite a controversial report published this week in the news, and that is that grandparents are ruining our children's health. Not all grandparents, but it does seem there are some guilty culprits. The University of Glasgow has published a report suggesting that grandparents are much more likely to overfeed the little ones, to give them sugar, to give them high-fat foods, while at home the parents are doing their best to just give them kale. Granny and Grandpa is shoving Haribos into their faces. Just it'd be interesting to get experiences here, really. Is this the case? I mean, that's what grandparents are for, isn't it, Simon?
It is the case. I was with my parents yesterday over in Stafford, and I've got 2 young children. They gave me a bag about this big, full of sweets to bring back, and my wife said we can't give the kids that because it's going to be bad for them. Kids crave sugar, and the grandparents want to please the kids. They don't see them as often as we see them. So I do agree that it is a problem.
Well, isn't that the very good example there of when it might be okay, when you don't see the grandparents very often, and you go to their house as kids. It's a place where you're spoiled. You're a king or a queen for the day when you go to Granny and Grandpa's house, aren't you? But it's when now grandparents are becoming much more involved in the daily childcare provision for little ones. If those will spoil the grandkids rules are in place, then suddenly you've got a problem, haven't you? Because it's every day or 3 days a week or whatever.
Well, I couldn't run my own business without the help of my parents, who have my children at least once every week. And yes, they do spoil them. Yes, they give them sweets and give them food that perhaps they shouldn't have every day. But I feel that is the price I pay for having wonderful, supportive, loving childcare. And also, it's part of the grandparents' experience. I used to lick the bowl out with my grandma every week, and you know, and
you
do
used
things
your
like
grandma to lick the bowl out. What? I can imagine that. Yeah, go on. But you're right.
It's
Lovely
part
memories.
of the experience. But I think their point is that you could sort of accept this as the way to live your life if that's the sort of main carer. But I think all good things in moderation. That's always the way.
Yes, including moderation at times. I have a friend who 100% says her daughter had a filling because the granny was giving her sweets after school. She, the parent, never. Sweets, no, can't have them. She was horrified when she went to the dentist and the little girl had to have a filling, and she blames her mother for this, totally. So there are consequences at times, aren't there?
Sometimes, but I think this piece of research is very ageist. Grandparents provide a whole, load of love, support, finances, and that having that extended family around is so beneficial. And the families that don't have that support, they suffer as a result of it.
Another thing it highlighted was that when children are with their grandparents, their physical activity drops.
Yeah, well, that's I suppose that might happen depending on the grandparents. I mean, we're lucky in our family in that our kids have got great grandparents as well. I mean, they do spoil them. Why buy one Easter egg when you can buy 2? Yeah,
yes.
Yeah. I think so.
But I think maybe the word is moderation, as Jess said.
Absolutely.
Back in a moment.
Yeah.
Hello, welcome back to the Notts TV debate with me, Fran, and panellists Adele, Irfan, Simon and Jess. Now, if you've walked through the Broadmarsh shopping centre in Nottingham, you'll know that it's hardly chock full of high-end retailers. In fact, a Notts TV count-up has revealed that more than half the units there are now empty, around about 54%. In fact. Now, of course, there is this in-between limbo land feel about the Broadmarsh because the promise is from Into that it will be redeveloped. So no point investing millions on behalf of retailers who will move in and set up inside there. But what is to become of those that are left? What's the answer? What would you do with the empty units that are in the Broadmarsh? I don't know whether you've got any ideas, Jess, as a director of the Nottingham Bid, which is the body that represents retailers and leisure providers and so on. What's the answer to the Broadmarsh at the moment? Because it's not going to be redeveloped for quite some time yet.
No, and it's really difficult because it's suffered in footfall because of the closure of the main multi-storey car park. And some of the changes in bus routes and things like that.
And it was already quite a ghost town, really, for footfall anyway.
I always want to see more thriving retail, more support for independent retailers. I think we've got to drop the rates because it's all very well providing rent-free and things like that, but it's the rates that's really, really, really high in the city.
So there's rent and then there's rates.
And then there's rates, which you don't always hear about. You know, I have a shop in the city centre and the rates are crazy. I think if you are going to put some independent retailers in there, there's going to need some rates help. But then perhaps those outside the Broadmarsh would feel a bit annoyed about that. So it's a tricky balance.
I don't know that they would really, because they have the choice to move in if they wish.
Well, they do, but will they get as much footfall as in down there as they would get, say, on Bridal Smithgate?
So how can they begrudge a retailer taking a punt, going into the Broadmarsh on reduced rates? Because
true, and I would much rather see it full than empty, because there's nothing sadder than an empty shopping centre, is there really?
Are there any creative solutions you can come up with though? Because I wonder whether, like you say, realistically, retailers are going to want to.
I'd like to see some things like maybe some projects with schools. There's a great project in Leicester with the Peter Jones Institute where they set up little mini businesses for a term. Perhaps they could have a go at doing it as a retail business and great entrepreneurial spirit to be encouraged.
Well, you're all about entrepreneurial spirit, Simon.
So they say.
You've got your magic wand there.
Yeah.
How are you going to?
You've got to get people in because it's on this downward spiral now. If you're looking at that as a proposition, the footfall's bad because there's not many people in, so nobody's going to come in. So I think some kind of pop-up shops of temporary nature where they, cut the business rates, cut the rent to get people in there, to get people used to going back in there, give them a reason to go back. You look at Stenton Market, what they've done there. There's a lot of pop-up, units now. People are going back to Stenton Market. Let's bring people back to the Broadmarsh. But if you price them out of the game, they're never going to play the game.
Yes. Have we almost got to the point with the Broadmarsh that really you should be looking at almost no rates and rent-free?
I think you have to, otherwise no one's going to go in there, and the big boys aren't going to go in there yet until it's been refurbished. So
that's right. And Into, by the way, is confident that this is all progressing now.
Absolutely.
Work probably going to start next year, but it won't be open fully refurbished till 2020. I mean, it will stay open, part of it presumably, but the whole reveal not till 2020. Do you often find yourself browsing the racks inside the Broadmarsh?
Yeah, I feel very sad about Broadmarsh because I remember it when it was built new in the 70s. And Nottingham was very buzzing, Broadmarsh was very buzzing, and people would come from miles away, all over England, to come and do shopping in Nottingham. And I think whoever the decision makers have been over the last 10, 15 years have let Broadmarsh slip. And look at the shopping in Derby, Leicester, Birmingham, much better than here.
Yeah, it's been a complex picture with Broadmarsh, hasn't it? Because there have been promises to redevelop which then fell through. So it has been in this sort of twilight zone of retail for so long. Adele, what would you do with it?
Well, I think that the development around that area is going to address some of the problems that you've raised, and I think it's really important that when people arrive in our city that that's all opened up. There'll be the view up to the castle, be much more pedestrianised in that area, and it should be a much more vibrant place to shop and spend some time, and just make that whole area, because it has felt quite, it's not the gateway to our city from the railway station that you would want, and we are obviously going to go through a period where because we're making changes, there will be some difficulties. So I think looking long term, it's going to be a really good thing for the city, bringing in investment and jobs, and so I'm absolutely convinced that we're moving in a positive direction. And I think in the short term, if we can, and that sounds like an excellent idea. I'm not aware of that from Leicester. And you're right, you need to build reasons for people to visit during this difficult period. So whether it's art projects, schools projects, everyone goes when their kids are involved in something.
Here's an idea
really
I'm just throwing in. I was watching a report the other day on an unused semi-derelict building down south. and 2 skate and mountain bike enthusiasts turned it into a massive skate park. So they put in the ramps, the boards, a few cafes dotted around it for people that like to do these kind of sports. What, I mean, it doesn't need to be all shops, does it? Can it be a facility for youngsters to hang around inside, do some skating, some mountain bike, what do they call it, trials riding? I don't know. But that could work. That could work. Get a grant, get the gear, chuck it in there, done.
There's a small sort of soft play area there in Broadmarsh at the moment. I would be well happy if you expanded that, because, you know, if you're taking your children shopping, then it's really nice for them to sort of let off some steam, and if you could perhaps sit and have a coffee at the same time, I think that would be snapped up.
Huge indoor children's play area. That could be another thing. Right, we're solving it right here.
Let's do
We've
it.
got Nottingham's future sorted. Any of your ideas are welcome on Twitter, by the way. Just use the hashtag NotsTVDebate. Now, Brexit. We can't have a Nots TV debate without mentioning Brexit. And this week, David Davis, the Brexit Secretary, has gestured towards the MPs who have demanded a vote on the deal that the government will strike up with the EU on how we leave, on the departure terms. And he's saying, MPs, you can have a vote on the final deal. However, that vote will not be something that could really, realistically be changed. The deal could be changed. So say they vote no, it'd be too late to really do anything about it other than walk away with no deal. So what is this vote? Is it pointless or is it good progress? How are you seeing it, Adele?
I think it's a big concession that they've been forced to make. I think it's really important that Parliament scrutinises the deal that they come to. What I want to see is that we don't fall off a cliff edge in a way that threatens jobs.
With no deal.
I think there's quite worrying noises from across the Conservative Party about just walk away, no deal's better than a bad deal. I think that what we need to do, it's the responsibility of government to achieve a good deal for Britain. And to make sure that our jobs and our services and our environmental protections and so on we're still protected. I think it's really concerning, the sort of quite gung-ho approach. It feels like a row in the Conservative Party has spilled out into the entire nation, and we're all going to pay the price for it.
Is the vote, though, say you were going to vote and you were like Adele and you thought we cannot have a no deal scenario, then your hands are tied, aren't they, in this final vote? You've got to vote yes to whatever deal the government has struck, haven't you?
It would appear to be that way, wouldn't it? That it's this deal or no deal, and it's just not.
I think we should get Noel Edmonds to announce the
in a little red box.
Yeah.
I think it's a bit tricky to say you can have a look at it, but you can't do anything about it. So why have a look at it in the first place?
If it's all or nothing, that's quite a risky strategy. Because if they vote no and there's no deal, there's no deal.
Perhaps so this might incentivise those that would, I don't know, there is more of an incentive perhaps to get this deal right, therefore. But that's to presume that these politicians who are working day after day to get a deal don't care enough. But I'm sure they do. But does this mean there is more of an accountability, though? So that could be a good thing.
Sorry, will you come to me then?
Well, anyone really, whoever wants to chip in, but yes, just trying to look at why this vote offer might be a good thing.
I think Parliament, a lot of people have made a lot of noise, haven't they, about taking back control. And then it looked for quite a long time like and talked about, the importance of our sovereign state. And for quite a long time, it looked like this was going to be entirely out of, that Parliament wouldn't even be in a position to properly scrutinise it. The talk of the of these powers that would enable them to just drop into the legislation whatever they wanted without it coming to proper parliamentary scrutiny was really, really worrying. So I hope that any legislation that comes out of this is properly scrutinised and goes to Parliament in full. I think that my absolutely my concern is for jobs, services and the environmental and consumer protections, that we maintain those. So anything that holds the government to account on that is a good thing.
Yes, I mean, we've talked in previous shows about whether a second referendum is what we actually need on the final deal. You're nodding your head.
Yeah,
would you like that?
I think we've been conned by Brexit. We've still got time to pull out. And I think we should think about that seriously. You know, I still remember the bus where it said £350 million for the NHS every week. Nothing's happened, along with a whole load of other lies as well.
Well, that's not, of course, what the Leave campaigners would say, is it? That, you know, there's been no conning going on. People have made their decisions, and that's that. We're leaving.
I agree. You can't have a second referendum. What does that say for democracy? The people voted. We are where we are. I think we need to get on with it. This vote via MPs could be a bit more ratification to ease it through, but you know, we've got to get on with it.
Okay, and well, getting on with it is sort of what's going on at the moment. Right, don't go away. We'll come back for the final part of the Notts TV debate in a minute. Hello, welcome back to the final part of this week's Notts TV debate with me, Francis Finn, and local folk, Adele Williams, Irfan Malik, Simon Gray and Jess Barnett. Now, your thoughts on student accommodation in Nottingham. We have thousands of students and of course they've got to live somewhere. And the latest debate to brew up, if you like, over student housing is how these homes are identified. There is one letting agency at the moment in the news for putting pretty large signs on the outside of its properties. And the students inside are saying, hang on, this is saying students live here and you're making us a potential target for burglars. Because when you think about it, student homes, one in particular that we've spoken to has 9 inside it. That's 9 laptops, 9 mobiles and so on. The property Notts Unilets in this instance has put a big sign outside the house. That company, by the way, hasn't wished to comment. But do you think the students have a point? Or is it not a good practice for branding good quality student homes so that other landlords can see, oh, that's the quality being offered, I need to up my game? What do you think, Irfan? Because you'll have been a student for many years.
Yes, I can see it from both sides. So the company who's owning the flats wants to advertise, you know, how good their flats are and wants to get more students for the next year. But at the same time, I can understand that as a student, they might feel vulnerable that this is a student block. But maybe they need to consult more and talk to their student body and come to some kind of compromise.
Are they overreacting, these students? We've got tower blocks upon tower blocks in Nottingham that are heavily branded as student accommodation.
I think they're overreacting. I was a student in Nottingham and the student accommodation now is much better than it was in my day. Then it was dealing with private landlords and, you know, pot luck really as to what you got.
There are still private landlords now, of course.
Yeah, exactly. But I think if you know the area, you know where the student accommodation is anyway. You've never got to sit in the street and see the students coming in and out. So I think the fact that there's an advertisement on the side of a property is neither here nor there. And these intermediaries that get students in, they need to advertise. Where they're going to advertise? On the property.
I think there's a responsibility for the companies, if they are going to advertise on the side, to make sure that they're providing a nice, secure home. You know, I think back to my student days and, you know, sometimes the door wouldn't even close. So
with a nice draft blowing through.
Yeah, absolutely. With our storage heaters instead of radiators. And boo-hoo, I'm going to start crying. But I think they do need to perhaps have a little look at security if they're going to advertise on the side of the buildings. But again, students, you know, insure your laptops, take out insurance. My sister had her student burgled. I remember this was probably over 10 years ago, but everything of value was stolen. And if you've not got insurance, then you're in a mess, really, aren't you? But perhaps you know, at Freshers Week, there should be some sort of advice from the Students' Union to say, you know, you are at risk as a student from theft. Perhaps think about taking out some insurance, which doesn't have to
it's
be
not
expensive.
though sometimes just the value of the laptop, it's all your work, isn't it, that you don't want to see walk off. But is this just about just taking some responsibility for yourself rather than this this trend we seem to be observing, which is people saying it's other people's jobs to look after me, it's other people's responsibility to make sure my things are safe.
Yeah, I agree. Students, have to be, as you said, responsible and insured for their stuff. And Nottingham has thousands and thousands of students, and sometimes there are areas of difficulties with the locals as well. So Nottingham should be encouraging and supporting students, but at the same time looking after local residents as well.
It's always difficult, isn't it, getting the balance right?
Yeah, I was thinking about local residents in terms of the branding on the outsides of the houses, is how that feels if you're, if you're next door and, almost...
And trying to sell your house, perhaps?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm sure anyone looking to buy a house in the area would be aware, as you say, that it's, in the big student areas, we're talking about any particular area. But, yeah, I mean, I can see that it does... I know what you're saying is, clearly there's some areas that are student areas, but if you've actually got a badge on the outside of the house that's quite visible, then I can understand the students' concerns. But also, as I say, in terms of the general area, then I think we want to encourage responsible landlords, and we want to encourage people living in an area to contribute to their area positively, and that and that landlords contribute to the area positively as well.
I think if anyone had tried to burgle one of the houses I lived in as a student, they'd have thought, oh, someone's beating me to this. They've ransacked the place.
We got burgled and we didn't even notice.
You did?
No, the police told us and we said we didn't even know we'd got burgled. So
wow.
There you go.
Yes,
Back in
yes.
the day.
All right, interesting. We're going to just stay with housing for the final part of the Notts TV debate and get your views on the affordability of homes and how younger people, the first-time buyers, are expected to find the average deposit. Now, research has shown the average deposit for a first-time buyer's house is £33,000, which is a big wodge of money, isn't it? That, my generation and above didn't have to find anything like that to get on the housing ladder. Well, there's an estate agency that's caused a bit of a stir by saying, younger people, just sort yourselves out, stop spending so much on luxuries. Then, if you're a couple, you can save £33,000 in 5 years, and that's your deposit. Let me give you an example. If you stop spending so much money on things like coffee, a couple in 5 years spends 6,250 quid on coffees, says this research. A couple will spend a whopping £13,200 in 5 years on takeaways. There's lottery tickets to the tune of £4,000. There's mobile upgrades, so not just your phone, but the upgrading of your phone, 770 quid in 5 years. There's gym membership, there's annual mini breaks away. All these things are now not really considered to be luxuries, you could argue. So, is that what needs to happen here? There needs to be some common sense and some tightening of belts and stop the whinging. What do you think, Jess?
Well, it depends how important owning your own house is. I think if you want to save that deposit, then sacrifices have to be made. As a small business owner, I've had to make sacrifices and things like they're not big dramatic ones, but it is about cutting luxuries. So saying, do I need a Sky TV subscription? No. Do I need, the latest, games console or something like that? No. There's got to be a balance with luxuries, and I think the other thing is, because of the growth of contactless and card use instead of cash, you're less aware when you're spending on luxuries. It's so easy to just tap, 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 and by the end of the week you've spent much more than you would have done perhaps if you had cash in your purse. So,
because if you buy, I've been a culprit for buying cappuccinos, let's say, as a way to get through the day, a little treat. So taking your lunch out of it, if you buy 2 cappuccinos a day at work, that's £5. That's £25 a week. That's £100 a month. That's £1,200 a year. Like that, gone. Mm-hmm. That's without buying your lunch. So you can easily get yourself into a spending habit that you wouldn't even think is lavish spending, couldn't you? So and do you think people just complain a little bit about how they can't afford things when actually they could?
I
I'm
think so.
generalising hugely here.
I think there's a generational thing here as
Yeah.
well, because growing up we didn't have all of those places to spend that money on. And now coffee shops are spreading all over, and all the, as you mentioned, the phones and the IT. So my children are spending a lot more on different stuff that I couldn't spend on when I was that age. And also students and younger people are in so much debt with all student fees and student loans and stuff that it's hard for them to anticipate, you know, what difference
To
is
judge the
going to make.
value of things
Yeah.
as such,
Yeah.
as affordable or not affordable. Yes, that's interesting about student loans. That's one of the arguments against students amassing so much debt, is that they're taught very early on that it's just normal to owe thousands of pounds. But then that's what a mortgage is.
It is, it is. I mean, I think some of those figures just seem way outside of my experience. I'll put it that way. They seem, well, I was very surprised to hear those. I don't think they're typical, certainly not of people in Nottingham. I know what you're saying about people buying cappuccinos, but sometimes it's the way people's work is structured, that they have to have meetings in cafes and so on. And, you know, so I think we live very busy lives nowadays. Sometimes people are forced into getting their lunch on the run because, you know, they're not able to make sandwiches in the morning because they're so busy with their kids and, you know, and so on. But I don't recognise those figures as realistic, to be honest. I think, and of course they're average taken across much wealthier parts of the country as well. I think the reality is that a lot of young people who are wanting to get on the housing ladder, they may be doing that, as you say, because they you know, you raised the point about prioritising buying a house. They may feel that they've got no choice because private rented accommodation is really expensive and possibly of lower quality. So I understand why people want to buy a house, but if you've got you know, if you're low paid, if you're, you know, that's the reality for a lot of young people. Their work is low paid and it's insecure, and that's what's at the bottom of the problem.
Rents aren't necessarily any less than you'd pay your mortgage. It's just that thing about a deposit, isn't it? And saving up to get that deposit. Perhaps people could save more than they imagine if they just looked at how much they were spending. Just finally.
But is it really the answer? Is somebody going to say today, I'm not going to have this coffee for the next I'm not going to have a coffee today or for the next 5 years to pay my deposit? I don't think it's the answer.
But they might say, I'll just have a coffee on a Monday and a Friday.
They might do. That requires a lot of self-discipline.
And I'll only have one takeaway a week, not 3.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, well, sadly, that's all we've got time for this week. And if you'd like to chip in, have a say on what you've been listening to, then do that on Twitter. Just use the hashtag #NotsTVDebate. But for now, a thank you to this week's guests, to Councillor Adele Williams, to Dr. Irfan Malik, to Simon Gray, and to Jess Barnett, and from me, Francis Finn. Good night.